I just want to say thank you to everyone for joining us today. This is going to be a really great time for the next hour and a half here we have together. And I just want to say a big shout out to all the volunteers at the Psychedelic Association of Canada. We have only 1.5 paid members at the Psychedelic Association of Canada, and the rest of this organization is volunteer run for you to do all these wonderful things, fill in all this information. We try to do webinars that are different, that other people maybe haven't covered as much, to really fill out the whole space of things that fall under that what is psychedelics and psychedelic in culture and spirituality and therapy and wellness, everything. And tonight in sexuality. So with all that, I am, like I said, I'm really excited. Dr. Kat Meyer, welcome. Thank you for joining us so much. And I'm going to hand it over to you to introduce yourself and start the presentation.
Yay. Thank you so much, Pam. I'm so excited to be here. And before we dive in and before I introduce myself and before we go on this trip together, I would like us to take a moment and bring our attention inward into our internal landscape of our own body and our mind. So just taking a moment to observe what's alive here. Noticing the pace and the depth of your breath as it moves in and out of your lungs. Observing the texture of sensations, buzz of energy, areas where you feel tense, collapsed, expanded. How you hold yourself in your seat or in this time and space. There is so much that exists, that happens, that moves through us in this internal experience. We call this interoceptive awareness. And there's a lot of intelligence when we pay attention to this experience. And so throughout this webinar that we do today, I want you to tune in and observe what happens in your own system as I give you information, as we explore this work together. And just be curious about what you see here. Let's exhale all the stagnant air out of our body. From the lowest part of the belly, take a deep breath in. Exhale the breath with a sigh. Again, deep breath in from the lowest part of your belly. And exhale with a sigh. One more time, deep breath in. Exhale, softly release. Again, observing the internal state here with just those 3 breaths. What's been changed? What's different? Whenever you're ready, you can open your eyes and connect back to me. Let's see. Can you all hear me?
You're clear to me, Kat.
Okay, great. I just saw on the, okay, good.
Yeah, I saw that from Dane, that truly difficult to hear, but I'm hearing fine, and it looks like Layla says it's fine too. So
Beautiful. Okay, great.
Continue. And I'm just going to add one more thing that I should have added. Sorry about this. If
Mm-hmm.
anyone has questions, put them in the Q&A, and I can ask them along the way here of Dr. Kat.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Yay. Okay, so On today's trip, we're going to be exploring the healing properties of how psychedelics can help us around our sexuality and our relationships. We're going to start out, I'm going to show you a model of sexual health that I use in my own practice. And then I'm going to share with you some of the observations in research in academia around sex, love, and psychedelics. I'm going to share with you some of the individual reports from my own personal phenomenological data that I've been collecting over the last year. And then I'm going to share with you how I use psychedelics in my own sex therapy practice, and even debut my sex and psychedelics integration model for you that I haven't shared with anybody else. I've been trickling it out over the last year, and you are going to get the debut. Yay! And then we're going to wrap up with the ethical and the harm reduction practices that make this work possible and safe. So it's going to be really fun, I promise. But to start out with telling you about who I am, I'm Dr. Kat Meyer, and I have a doctorate in psychology practicing under my marriage and family therapy license. I specialize in sexuality, trauma, and psychedelic therapy. I'm trained in ketamine and MDMA-assisted therapy. I'm also a combo facilitator, and I've been working years with ritual and ceremony. I am a published research, or I've published research in the Academic Journal of Sex and Culture around sexuality. And I have my own book, Sex Love Yoga, which is also the name of my company. I have over 10 years of training and experience in traditions of Tantra and BDSM, and both of these traditions have informed my work so much. You may even see some of the essence of both of these in how I conceptualize my work here. I've been leading workshops and lectures on the intersection of sex therapy and ketamine-assisted therapy. I've also taught retreats around the world, and will be leading retreats for couples and individuals with ketamine-assisted group therapy in the coming 2024. So I came to this work, and the excitement that rests behind the work that I do here is from my own personal experiences around psychedelics, as well as my 13 years in doing sex therapy. I remember the first ayahuasca ceremony that I had done. I went to the bathroom and I looked into the mirror, and it was in that moment that I just started touching my face and caressing myself and eye gazing with myself. And I truly fell in love with myself in that moment. And as a therapist, we teach a lot about self-love, and we teach a lot about, you work towards this ability to self-source your own love. And it's something that we see on Instagram, as these beautiful memes of just love yourself, just do this. And yet it's such a complex concept. And in this moment in the ayahuasca, in the bathroom of ayahuasca, I embodied the feeling of self-love. And it was in that moment that I could really touch on what it is that I was looking for in this work. It was this full embodied experience of that which I've been trying to do intellectually for so long. And then it was in another ceremony that I embodied the sensation of letting go and using my own breath to surrender into my body and feeling pleasurable waves of energy rolling through me, and even just being able to connect with pleasure again. And then in another ceremony, I got to face off with the fear associated with a sexual abuse that I had had, and finding an inner sense of safety again. Similar in my own personal ketamine-assisted therapy sessions, as me as the client, being able to touch on some of these concepts that might otherwise have been just intellectual concepts. And I really want to emphasize the importance of, I believe in psychedelic ceremony culture, but I also believe in therapy in conjunction with psychedelic use as what helps us to have this lasting change. Therapy helps us to be able to integrate symbols, helps us to integrate insights, helps us to identify patterns in ourselves, and helps us to be able to anchor into practices for the actual lasting behavioral change. But what these experiences did for me was that it created the embodied reference point of what I was working towards. Like I said, some of these concepts, self-love, surrender, inner safety, are intellectual concepts that we might be able to understand, we might be able to talk about, we might be able to encourage people to do, but we take these words for granted because I believe that it's not just about the willpower to do what we're reminded to do on an Instagram meme or a therapist telling us to do it or our friends to tell us to do it or culture to pressure us to do it, but it's more complex than that. And psychedelics as a tool, and it's not for everyone, and I'll get into the reason why in the harm reduction portion of this talk, but they can really be a tool to help us understand where we're going with this work and to help us understand a place that we can return back to. So the practices give us, the practices of self-love help us to continue returning to that embodied state again and again and again. Now, as a sex therapist, looking at sexual challenges of an individual, we know that there are layers of interacting contextual factors, that it's not just one thing, that there tends to be an inner influence of context that's both outside of us and inside of us as a result of everything we've experienced in our lives and cultural pressures, familial expectations, personal experiences, traumas. And one of my favorite models that I love using to help people to identify the growth in their sexual health and to be able to see where they can do, where they can put effort into expanding and growing is the erotic intelligence model. So I'm going to pull that up here so that you can see this. Okay.
You can see that.
Great. So the erotic intelligence model can be measured by these qualities: the body awareness, social intelligence, creative imagination, self-awareness, and emotional intelligence. Like, our individual sexuality is always evolving. It's always evolving because we're always evolving. It's the manifestation of how we perceive ourselves. It's how we relate with the world. It's how we express ourselves in the world. And erotic intelligence is really more than just the act of sex. It's how we bring it into things like food or music or fashion or nature. It's really how we bring our eroticism, our sexuality. We are sexual beings. There's no way that we can really separate that in our system into the world around us. Psychedelics, well, probably jumping ahead of ourselves, but I believe that psychedelics can return us to this state, as in psychedelics can help us to remember that nature is innately erotic. Not only in the fact that it reproduces sexually, but it also has its own deep rhythm. The way that the air moves around us, or the rhythm of the earth, the vibration of the earth, or the way that we find pleasure in the silkiness of flower petals or the smell of flowers, the way we really take that in. Nature reminds us that we don't have to just look for some hot guy to turn us on, hot guy or hot girl to turn us on, but everything around us can be a source of turn on, including our own selves. So these 5 qualities of erotic intelligence help us to see where we might be lacking attention that would be contributing to a low vibrancy of energy, or the low vibrancy of our expression, or even just boredom around sex. We might feel drained, we might feel bored, we might feel unmotivated. And where we can turn our attention to put more effort and more activity and practices into. So body attunement is about our connection with our internal body. We did that at the very beginning of practice. This is the interoceptive awareness of our body. How present are we to the nuance of the sensations of our body? How present are we to the needs of our body? And do we tune into it, or do we tune out of it? Needs live in our body. Desire lives in our body. Our boundaries live in our body. Our turn-ons live in our body. And if we're not paying attention, then we're not going to know what those are to be able to communicate that, and how much that impacts our ability to cultivate a sex life that we want. Similarly, chronic pain, painful penetration, these are all symptoms of the body that we need to look at and take care of. There's a root cause that can be addressed here, but we can't if we're not attuning to the body, if we're not aware of that body. The second one is social intelligence. How well are we interpreting the interactions and managing our relationships? How are we expressing ourselves to other people? Social intelligence is all about the makeup of our emotional intelligence and our self-awareness. So this is about knowing when and how to listen. It's the timing of our response. Do we make repair attempts when there's a misjudgment or a relational injury, or we hurt somebody's feelings, or we do something in sex that didn't quite land? And if we're engaging in partnered or group sex, then it involves our ability to negotiate our needs and our boundaries and our desires. It is our ability to listen to requests, our ability to not pressure our expectation in sex or our agenda in sex. And it's our ability to communicate through misunderstandings. Emotional intelligence is about how well we read the emotions of others. How well do we self-regulate when we get dysregulated, or when we have big emotions? How can we hold those emotions? How well do we express our emotions versus suppressing them? And how empathetic or compassionate or curious do we get with others and with ourselves and our emotional experience? This is about our ability to be vulnerable, to be seen, to have the ability to reveal ourselves and in a safe manner that really impacts our arousal. Sexual fantasies and desires and turn-ons are natural to us, and yet they also come with it so much miseducation and so much shame around sex that when we reveal it to other people, it can either create a powerful relief in the body, or it can cause a clenching tension that inhibits the flow of arousal. And even more, if we suppress our emotions or if we have unprocessed trauma, this will impact the health of our nervous system. It also impacts our arousal and our orgasm and our ejaculation as a result of the health of our nervous system. So it's really, really important to have that in our contributing to our sexual health and vibrancy. Self-awareness is about knowing what our motivations, our patterns, our behaviors, our core beliefs about ourselves, our own lovability, our beliefs about others, our beliefs about the world, and knowing our internal working model around sex and our bodies and our self-worth really helps us to understand what blocks may be getting in the way of our functioning for sex, or even just the desire and wanting of sex. And then lastly, creative imagination is helping us to bring novelty back into our sex life. If we're falling into habit of doing the same techniques or the same positions or the same linear functional sex life, it's gonna get boring and we're gonna lose motivation for it. So creative imagination keeps things interesting again. And again, if we have high erotic intelligence, then that means that we're putting attention into all of these categories. But if we're feeling low erotic intelligence, and we're feeling drained, we're feeling bored, then we can look at this model and say, okay, which of these isn't getting enough attention from me? And let me focus on that. So when we bring conscious awareness, like this model here, into what we're doing, like it takes into what we're doing with the psychedelics, then it takes just having a great time in sex with drugs into, let me see what's highlighting or happening in me during this experience so that I can change, so that I can make a lasting change, so that I can come up with the practices that are going to contribute to that lasting change. And I'm going to stop that share. So research is still in the early phases of understanding psychedelics, and just in general, really, but let alone relationships and sex. I feel like relationships and sex tend to get the last leg of funding for research. But it is interest that is gaining in academia, and I'm so excited to read about the research that continues to come out. This last couple weeks, I spoke at a Wonderland conference, and I got to hear some of the latest research on sex and psychedelics, and that's just really exciting. We oftentimes see more what's happening with the relationships, and some of the more popular research that people can quote or that we often hear about is about the research done with MDMA for PTSD or PTSD in couples, and shows that it not only alleviates the symptoms or helps resolve some of the symptoms of PTSD to the point that it's no longer meeting the criteria, but it also affects the quality of the relationships as well. And so we know that MDMA reduces the fear aspect of the amygdala, which is contributing to the feelings of safety and increasing interpersonal trust. It really increases really what's going on is that it's increasing the threshold of the emotional and the physical threshold of what we can tolerate. And it allows us to be able to be with difficult emotions. It allows us to be with difficult memories a lot more effectively without dysregulation. And being in the window of tolerance for our nervous system is a key part of resolving trauma in the system or resolving conflict between partners. If we're getting dysregulated, we're not able to see the perspective of the other person. Or if we're afraid that the perspective of the other person is going to threaten our reality or our experience, then we're a lot less likely to be able to be present to it, to find that resolution between us. So as a result, we're seeing more pro-social behavior. There's more empathy. There's more vulnerability of shares. There's a perception of the individuals with connection and support. There's non-avoidance of some of these more challenging topics or memories or emotions. And there's more openness in perspective, in safety and intimacy. This is what we're seeing from this research. MDMA also creates a reference point for couples to be able to bring more vulnerability and affection and honesty and open communication that perhaps they didn't have that reference point before. They're used to getting in conflict. And from here, now that they know what this is like, and they know that they can share vulnerable information, their partner can hold it and be present to it and even be curious to it, then that can translate into their everyday relationship. I also see that there's a big cultural pressure, especially on individuals who identify as male, and this concept of masculinity, this pressure of like, don't be overly emotional or don't be connected to your emotions. And yet in romantic relationships, there is the pressure to be emotional and to be available in your emotional experience. And so MDMA helps to create that atmosphere for individuals to be able to open up and to be able to even connect with what's going on emotionally in their own body. And so even with just these research, with MDMA and couples therapy, and then also PTSD, you can see how this touches on all 5 of those components of erotic intelligence. But then we also see this across several other psychedelics. So in ayahuasca, the late researcher Yalila Espinoza explored how women's sexual and spiritual lives were transformed with the sacred Amazonian plant teachers around purification and support for their reproductive health. So these individuals experience sexual trauma or reproductive trauma. And working with them, she was able to see the themes of feeling of the women reporting or, expressing that they felt cleansed from some of these challenges, that there's an increase of sensory awareness, so an awareness of their body, awareness of their sensuality, transforming the relationship with their own selves and with their body, and empowered decision making, which is often common and really, really important to address, especially with sexual trauma. And being able to delineate boundaries and to be able to express those and communicate those. And then also enhance intimacy with other people, enhance cognitive awareness, and then connecting with subtle energies of the body, as well as some of them reported connecting with God, this God sense. So a very strong spiritual element to this. And outside of, this, outside of my own therapy, ayahuasca was the first place that I had been drawn to address some of the symptoms of my sexual trauma. But again, I did this in conjunction with therapy. And also I hear this very similar stories from clients that I help with integration therapy after they've come back from ayahuasca ceremonies as well. So I think that's really important to take into consideration. We have these psychedelics that we can see clinically in the office, but we also can't ignore the fact that our clients are reaching, are seeking alternative help with psychedelics, and how can we support them with safety and with education and integration. So it's not about saying just because and many of these are illegal, some of these are legal. So some of these ones that I'm talking about specifically are legal, but yes, and but then there's also other realms, and so we just want to create a lot of education to support that safety. We also see a lot of help with cannabis in sex. I see this in my office as well. Cannabis can increase the sexual functioning, increase satisfaction of sex when only taken into consideration the dose, the method of administration. So that's oral or it's topical, suppository, inhalation, like smoking it, as well as the frequency of use, the personal body chemistry. Everybody's body responds differently, and gender. Men may have an issue with maintaining erections or orgasm when they consume too much THC or too frequently of THC. What we do see at the right dose, and considering all of these contexts, is that it can increase muscle relaxation, vasodilation, which is the widening of blood vessels, sensation focus, so being more a focus on sensations and pleasure of the body, and ability to orgasm. We also see it decreases in pain associated with sex, especially chronic pain. So individuals experiencing chronic pain or with painful penetration. I've had my clients who have vaginismus, dyspareunia use suppositories to be able to help to relax the muscles and to help with alleviating some of that painful aspect of it. And then also decreasing anxiety and racing thoughts, which can all contribute to increase of sexual desire. Now, most of these research that I've looked at talk about the macro doses or bigger doses. And I really think that it's important to also have the conversation about the potential power of microdosing as well. Is dosing important? Does it have to be a macro in order or a bigger dose to have the same effects? And I don't think that that's necessary. The research, and it's all really early research, is looking at microdosing of psilocybin, LSD, and MDMA for sexual satisfaction. And these researchers found that there's a heightened sensitivity towards touch and connection to waves of pleasure in the body, confidence in understanding the needs and the desires, increase of exploration and trying out novel new positions or activity or toys, moving away from this goal-oriented and performative aspect of sex and becoming more falling into the flow of pleasure and letting pleasure be the compass. And that's my word, not theirs, but also to be more drawn towards the intimate connection, focused on the intimate connection rather than the goal of orgasm or the goal of performance or looking good or getting the other person off. But it also seeing the increase of relationship satisfaction, so including easier communication about sex and a more positive self-image and mindfulness around sex. Now, there needs to be more research on this, definitely, because there's a lot of talk about our microdoses. Is this about a placebo effect, or is this actually something that's contributing to the body? All of this is valid questions, and I want to see more research on this. But what I am seeing is from anecdotal research is that people are having a lot of experiences with this. And I think it's important to put our attention on microdosing because it can also be more accessible. It can also be, in a sense, safer than necessarily a macrodose, and when done correctly and with support. And it's closer to a state that we would more traditionally be in, like an everyday state. So the ability for integration, I think, can be more easily accessed than necessarily the higher doses. So with that, I invite everybody to just take a deep breath here. I know this is a lot of information. Really tickling our cognitive brain right now. And there's just really not a lot of research on sex and psychedelics yet. But we know that it benefits us from people sharing their experiences. So in September of 2022, I started putting together my own surveys to collect phenomenological data. So as of today, I've collected data from over 807 participants showing the use of psychedelics for sexual intentions. And I have this on a beautiful chart. Okay. So from my survey, I asked the question of how many people had experience using psychedelics in a sexual dynamic or for sexual intentions. And you can see on here just the amount of people using it and the frequency. So some of them, the majority of people either had less than 10%, or I'm sorry, less than 10 times, or had never experienced that. And then I also asked the question of how many of them have engaged in sexual activity while microdosing psychedelics. That's a lot. It's almost 50%. And that's why I think it's really important to get some of the research to focus on that. Then I asked the question of how many people had consensual sexual activity while on the different substances: psilocybin, MDMA, cannabis, LSD, ayahuasca, ketamine, DMT, mescaline. And you can see that there's a lot. Hopefully you can see the little text there. So the most, you can see MDMA and cannabis has the most frequently used in this. And then you'll look at the ayahuasca, the mescaline, the DMT have the least amount of people having experienced that. And I think a big part of that is these are traditionally ceremonial activities or ceremonial medicines. And some of these are protected medicines. So I definitely want to take that into consideration as well. Some of these other ones are a lot more accessible. So I think that contributes to people's use. And then I asked the question of what has been some of their biggest revelations regarding romantic intimacy that they've had on psychedelics. And I saw common themes of being more expressed emotionally and intimately and vulnerably. So I really like this quote, these two quotes. While on MDMA, I witnessed in a hallucinatory way the armor falling off my psyche and a new intense level of openness of emotions and expressions pouring out from me, or the ability to say what is on your mind and having trust with my wife on cannabis. Then interconnectedness. Ketamine, we were deeply connected through a universal web of love, a sense of oneness and connection with my partner in the entire universe equals love equals God, MDMA. And the realization of depth of partnered love. Ayahuasca, seeing clearly how much my partner loved me and wanted to make me feel good, and how difficult it is for me to receive their love, and how I need to work so much harder to receive it. And on LSD, I realized that despite my fear and uncertainty around commitment, I really, really love her, and I don't need to make it more complicated than that. I asked questions about compassion, both for the self and for the partner. And 76% out of 575 reported yes. And it was very close and similar to compassion for the partner, made 76%. So that's 422 out of 552. And this is really important to highlight the compassion piece, because so much of sex many of us have complicated relationships around sex, whether it's shame or negative past experiences around it. And if we are stuck in the shame cycle or the critical cycle, then it makes it really hard for us to be able to work with. Shame likes to attack others or attack ourselves, and it likes to hide from others, and it likes to hide from ourselves. So the fact that these responses say that they were able to connect with compassion more easily tells us that this can act as a way for us to be able to work with some of these shame or some of these parts that are inhibiting our sexuality. Okay, and then I asked, what's the biggest revelation regarding sex that they had on psychedelics? So I found themes of freedom and expression from inhibitions and judgment, increase of pleasure in the body, sex as an energetic experience, and deeper feelings of partner connection. So you can see some of the shares in here. I felt calm, open, and present. I felt my heart space open up without worry. I was doing sex, quote unquote, wrong. There wasn't worry of judgment, expectations, or comparisons. That being less in your head and more in your body makes for a much better connection sexually, MDMA and ketamine. That we can be more embodied and connect deeper with ourselves and our partners when we take the time to slow down and tune in, that there is a whole other level of energetic experience that we can enjoy that's not just outward ejaculation. And then the last one, MDMA, along with 4 months of couples sex therapy, MDMA journeys literally saved my marriage, able to, 100,000% open up partners as well to each other and to share our most intimate desires, vulnerably, verbally, physically, able to transform our trauma wounds from previous relationships and generational trauma. These are really, really powerful shares. And it really shows us that sex can also, we've been given sex as this very narrow definition of what it is. It tends to be genital focus, orgasm focus, performance, trying to focus on the other person and get them off. And yet this describes sex as something that is, it can be an energetic experience, one that's not limited to the physical body and friction, but that, or even penetration, but that it can be non-physical, that it can be energetic, that it can be cosmic, that it can be just affection oriented. And I think that can really contribute to some of the dysfunction that we're having, because we're fixated on having to make sure that the erection works, or to make sure that I can have an orgasm. And this reminds us that you don't. In order to have a very pleasurable, satisfying sex life, it can be so much more. So can we expand the definition of sex and move away from this old paradigm of this heteronormative cisgender type of sex and something that is, yeah, cosmic. Okay, so this is what's happening in the wild. But I'm also seeing a lot of incredible results in my own practice. So ketamine, in my own office, I work with ketamine-assisted therapy. And I work specifically with lozenges. So sublingual has a 30% of bioavailability. Intramuscular has about 87%, and IV has 100%. What I use in my office is sublingual for the very reason that it helps my clients to be able to stay in connection with their body. Yeah, sometimes they might float out of their body, but it's not so far removed from their body that they can't be in witness to the somatic experience that's going on as well. Ketamine at lower doses acts as more of an empathogen. It helps us to connect with our vulnerability. It acts as a lubrication in speech and in thought. It can help us to better connect with our body, especially with my clients who have trauma. I work a lot with sexual trauma clients, and there's an inability or a lack of desire to connect with their body because there's a lot of pain or anxiety here. And ketamine will increase the threshold of what you can tolerate so that you can be with those emotions more easily. You can be in the body, be in the sensations more easily. I also see that it lifts the heaviness of anxiety. It lifts the heaviness of depression. If somebody's already dissociating from these pieces, then this can help to lift that so they can be more present, even to be able to connect with pleasure. I've had so many clients tell me that this is the first time that they felt all the chatter in their head go away, and that they felt this expanded, floaty sensation in their body, and they felt good there, and they felt safe there. At higher doses, you'll get more of a psychedelic experience. You'll have out-of-body experiences, ego dissolution, and that's beautiful in its own ways. It's not what I use in my own practice. I like keeping that in more of the smaller range. And then, yeah, my clients will tell me that they have an increase of desire and openness of love towards their partner, even towards themselves, compassion towards themselves, which is similar to what we were finding in the phenomenological data, but also feeling more relaxed and accessing these states of pleasure that they haven't been able to before. They can find more clarity around the blocks to their sexual desire, like why haven't they been motivated to want sex, or patterns in their desire as it wanes or as it increases. And then even being able to find resolution around some of these sexual violations or this sexual trauma that's occurred in the past. I've had clients even meet in the space of the ketamine, the perpetrators, to be able to have these conversations that it wouldn't be safe for them in the outside world. But in this space, they could find that resolution and find the inner safety and clarity again that they weren't able to before. So the question that I get asked often from people is, what makes the difference between a psychedelic experience and an erotic psychedelic experience? I really believe that, again, psychedelics can help us with our eroticism. And I believe that we can make any of these psychedelics erotic, that we can turn any of these into these practices of being able to, both meet the reference point and then also heal these parts of ourselves. And for a long time, I had the question of, can we turn any of these into these erotic experiences? And it was in my ketamine therapy training that a couple years ago that we were in the experiential practice with sublingual ketamine, and I had a full-on energetic orgasm in this space. I had the intention of wanting to just see how ketamine could be used for sex therapy. And so I used the tools of body scanning. I wanted to stay connected to the body. I didn't want to have an out of body experience. And I used my breath and I used my movement. And then all of a sudden, this whole wave of energy came over my body, and I started rolling in this pleasurable experience. And then I sit up and I come into this sharing circle, this integration circle, and I'm in a room full of doctors and therapists who all turn to me and ask me what I'm what I'm doing, what happened there. And so it was in that moment where I realized that even ketamine could be helpful for sex therapy, could be helpful, it could be erotic in and of itself. So since that experience, I've compiled all these experiences of my clients and then of my own years of studying sex therapy and Tantra and BDSM to come up with a model that I call Aerosynthesis. And this is debuting this model right now. So yay. And Aerosynthesis can help us to see how we can self-source our own turn on. I believe that this model can be helpful as an integration tool, something that we can use in the psychedelic experience or in something that we can use as an integration tool. We don't have to have a psychedelic experience to be able to self-source our own turn on. But again, like we've talked about, like I've shared before, psychedelics can give us the reference point. So the Aerosynthesis model can be used as a solo practice or with a partner. As a solo practice, we can make love to ourselves. And I think that that's really important. We've been conditioned the concept around masturbation, and there's a lot of shame around that word. And masturbation can be a practice of getting to know your own genitals, but it also has some of the stigma to it. It also has some of the religious stigma around it, but also it can also be more of a functional practice rather than a pleasurable practice. So thinking of self-pleasure or making love to ourself, or really just enjoying the affection of being in our own body is really important. How that translates to sex then with another person, if we choose to have sex with another person, because we don't have to. But it allows us to create this model of, instead of outsourcing our turn on again to somebody outside of ourselves, that we have all the tools inside of us. And then also it takes the pressure off of somebody else to know how to make us orgasm or how to turn us on, and it empowers us. It puts it back into our own hands. So in this model, I've identified 5 different practices here, or 5 different elements that contribute to our turn on. The first one is breath, and the second one is sound. The third one is movement, visualization, and touch. And I have associated these with the elements, the 5 elements. Now, under each of these elements, I have 2 different ways that we can manipulate each of these aspects to promote activation and movement and arousal in the body. So with breath input, there's a difference between breathing in and out of your nose and in and out of your mouth. There's also depth. If you breathe deep into your body versus if you breathe shallow into your chest, 2 different somatic experiences. And you can do it right now while you're listening to me. Then you also have the pace. If you speed up your breath versus if you slow down your breath, you're going to have a very different experience. And I'll get into the importance of that in just a moment as I expand on this model. Sound, you can change the pitch, you can change the tone. The tone is the attitude of the sound, the texture of the sound. I love to incorporate things like letter sounds, so like V and Z, or growling in the back of your throat, or purring in your throat, and then volume, loud volume versus soft volume. whispers. Movement starting with the pelvic floor squeeze. So gently squeezing at the pelvic floor and gently releasing. Pelvic rocking, which is very primal movement of rocking the pelvis forward and back. Circles. I like to think of circles as activating the energy, or activating, our turn on into the base of our pelvis. And then spirals is how we draw that energy up, or how we move into the spine, and we allow the spine to circulate and draw that up. Waves is like the spine undulation, the spine moving in an S shape forward and back. And then vibrations, which is very small, subtle shivers of the body. Visualization incorporates fantasy, visualizing balls of energy movement, the rooting, the sense of visualizing roots down into the ground, or the visualization of expansion in our own body or expansion beyond our body. And then touch is has to do with the source. So is this coming from a hand, a toy, a body part? What's the pressure? What's the pace of the touch? What's the location and the direction of the touch? And here I'm talking about touch that's consciously aware. Like, we're consciously aware of being in our fingertips. We're consciously aware of being in the body, where the body's connecting. And then with all of this, it's really important to have a containment for this. So I've used two principles from ancient Greek, the words of cosmos and chaos, to help explain this a bit more. Cosmos is the ordered system and structure, and this represents the container that we create using pragmatic steps and rituals to support safety. We cannot surrender into our fullest emotional and energetic experience if we don't feel like the container is safe, or if it's not holding us. And I see this a lot in my therapy practice. The reason why a client can break down and have an emotional cathartic release is because they feel really safe with me. And I'm using very practical tools and steps to create that sense of safety. I am acting as their container in that sense, so that they can fully let go. In the sense of psychedelics, we want to create a structure in the environment. This is set and setting, but also create a structure internal to the person. So giving them resources, giving them tools to be able to be their own containers, so that they can fully let go into the second component, which is chaos. And chaos is the energy that is raw, it's unbridled, it's powerful, has the ability to create and destroy. In Greek, it's the mythological void state that precedes the creation of cosmos. Cosmos, again, being the structure, the order, and it's the thing that's birthed from the void. So this really represents the internal states of our being, the emotions, the thoughts, the somatic experiences, the energetic flow, our memories. And this is our ability to let go and surrender into this void, and into the sense of this void, this unknown, and the fullness of the experiences affects our potential for growth and healing. So sometimes we need to completely have a breakdown of the internal somatic clenching. We need to cry, we need to have the cathartic release of grief. And again, we can't do that unless we feel the safety of a container. And so then I've organized this into a protocol. And the first part of this protocol is creating that container, is really honing into that cosmos, thinking about the attention that we get. At the beginning of this call, we gathered our attention. We brought our awareness in, the interoceptive awareness inside of our bodies, as well as the extraception, the awareness that's outside of our body, what's happening in the room. And then also knowing, do we have all that we need? Do we have water? Do we have snacks? Do we have resources and people to call for emergencies? Do we have all of that in place? Do I trust the person that's holding space for me? Do I trust that the room is not going to be walked in on? That kind of thing. Then mindset is the intention as well as establishing our own desires and our own boundaries and our own needs. So are we negotiating that both within our own selves, and then if somebody else is in that space and we're exploring with somebody else, or they're just being a sitter for us, are we expressing those desires and boundaries and needs? What do we need in order to feel safe in that sense? And then grounding. So regulating our nervous system is really important at the start of a psychedelic experience, because if we're in a dysregulated state, a stimulant like MDMA, it may not be helpful. It can really impact the outcome of the experience. So I would always encourage, and then even do this with my own clients, to slow down their breaths, to witness themselves dropping into a layer deeper into relaxation and letting go. I also use practices from somatic experiencing, like savoring and something that feels good in the environment, something that's pleasurable, something that they enjoy. And as they savor that, it expands into the body. So that also helps to bring us into a parasympathetic system of more rest. And then finally, ritual. Ritual really activates and designates the specialness and the flow. And there's been a lot of research on this too. Katie Anderson's research shows that creating an intimate container or setting boundaries around space and relationship allowed couples who are engaging in MDMA together to feel supported in safety and in specialness of their relationship. And this is really important for intimate bonding. Beyond just the everyday connection that you might have, it really helps to bond the two together. Like, this is special. We're picking just us and we're doing this together. Ritual is also a really important component of creating containment, and it can be symbolic and it can also be pragmatic. These rituals of negotiation or setting our intentions is pragmatic, but then there can also be symbols as rituals too. Sometimes we might have a specific tool that acts as a mnemonic device that reminds us to enter into a particular state. Some people like crystals, or some people like the sound of a rattle. It can also really serve as an experience to help us to reformulate the past, or return to an earlier state of healing or an earlier state of cleanliness or purity. A really good example of ritual, like a ritual of a baptism. You have this cleansing activity to be able to return into a pure state, or an energetic sweeping of the hands, or some people use incense in their space, or some of the indigenous use sage as a way to cleanse the space. And then from there, once you have that container, then moving into the second portion, which is stirring the chaos. So that's using those 5 elements as a way to activate and turn on and really open up to the experience of our emotions, the experience of our memories, of our sensations. And then closing the container again. Closing the cosmos, having that structure there. And this is, again, bringing attention back into the awareness of your body, of the room, of your interoception, the mindset, bringing into acknowledgement that we're coming to a close, the ritual of actively symbolizing the ending of a formal experience. How do you symbolize that? Some people express gratitude. Some people will put their hands on their heart. And then grounding, so down regulating the central nervous system again, soothing with breath, or putting hands to parts of the body, soothing the body. And then aftercare transitions is also part of grounding. What do you need to get back into your human body? What do you need emotionally? What do you need physically to be able to take care of yourself? I've taught elements of this model, and I do psychedelic harm reduction and education and integration sessions. And individuals, couples who've come back and shared with me have had really profound experiences. I think for a lot of this, people don't tend to think about the structure, how to create the safe sense. Yeah, we've heard of set and setting, but when it comes to engaging with our sensual body, engaging with our sexual body, and then incorporating somebody else in that space, there's so many more unique aspects that we need to consider here that many don't have the reference point for, but also I think many people don't understand that psychedelics can be erotic, that they can be sensual, that they can be sexual. Many people have told me, I don't feel sexual on on psilocybin. I get stuck in my head and want to work through things. And I'm like, yeah. And if you incorporate some of these elements there, let's see if that would have a change. So returning back to and emphasizing again, the safety in this is so important, because what I also saw in the research that I did is really highlights the importance of this harm reduction practices and the importance of educating our clients, or just educating ourselves, because there were 10%, this is showing the inappropriate interaction with facilitators even, that 10% of 339 people reported non-consensual sexual activity in a psychedelic experience. So this is whether you're in facilitation or not, this is just non-consensual sexual activity. This is really highlights that the impact that the lack of education on consent and how consent changes in a psychedelic space can really do harm. And I'll get into that and under ethical considerations. But also seeing the number of people who've experienced facilitator and shamans making sexual advances during psychedelic experiences. There's a lot of underground work that's happening, and it's hard to catch where this is happening. So people are coming into my office having had experiences where of these non-consensual sexual advances and had trauma as a result of it. Some of these individuals had bypassed their own boundaries to allow the touch from a facilitator and shaman. And some of these reasons were that they thought it would be healing, or they felt obliged. They feared their reaction if they said no. That's 4% of 331 people who responded to this. That's incredible. That's, even just one is too much, but 4% is considerable. And then 17% of 324 said that they had flashbacks of sexual abuse while on psychedelics. And this highlights the ethical considerations that we as clinicians and we as facilitators really need to take care of. The questions of, are we working from our zone of competency, or are we undereducated in these areas? Sex and sex therapy is a very different area than just psychedelics or just mental health or even trauma. And so how are we being in integrity of getting the education to hold space for individuals that are coming to us with these challenges? Also, are we as clinicians and facilitators, are we working alone in this field, or are we a part of consultation groups? I'm a part of 2 consultation groups, and we support each other, and we have meetings together, and we're on call with each other, and we're in chats together to be able to ask for resources, to ask for advice, or to ask, hey, am I doing something wrong here? Because we don't know. Sometimes we don't know if we're being inefficient, or if we're doing something that's bordering an ethical issue. So having people surrounding us, giving us mirrored reflections is really important. Also, are we doing our own personal therapy work around our own attitudes towards topics of sex? As a sex therapist, I went through the AASECT, that's the American Association of Sex Educators, Counselors, and Therapists. They have a SARS program, and the SARS program is all about sexual attitude readjustment. So it's us going in and looking at things like BDSM, things like non-monogamy, things like group sex and kink and tantra, and talking about them, and challenging our own attitudes and understandings. Because if we're going to hold space for somebody and we're not checking our own projections and our own bias, then we're actually creating an unsafe container. Also, are we as clinicians getting our own sexual needs met? Whether that's with our own self or with somebody else, a partner or lover or otherwise, or dominatrix, because if we aren't getting our sex needs met, then there can be more of a likelihood that comes out or that the pressure shows up with our clients, the turn on and desire for our clients. And even I think it can lead to some of these situations that we're having with sexual abuse between physicians and facilitators and clients. I also think it's important as facilitators that we understand the concept of consent for our own selves. Are we using invitation language, checking in with the client, recognizing that consent changes. So we need to keep asking about it. We need to communicate ahead of time before a dosing session, the type of touch that will occur into a session and the boundaries around this, and asking if that feels okay for them or if they would like to change that. And then also, do we as facilitators have proper boundaries in place and communicated with our clients? That our touch, the time frame, the communication exchange outside of sessions, as much as we can create that containment, the more safety we can create. And then as this relates to our clients learning about harm reduction practices, the very first question we need to ask is, are they appropriate for this psychedelic? Are they, what's their family history? What's their personal history around mental illness, diagnosis? Are there current psychotropic medications that they're on, SSRIs, MAO inhibitors? These don't mix with so many of the psychedelics and can cause a lot of harm. But if people don't take the time to look into that, then they can do so much harm. So it's important for us to be on the forefront of this education. Are they testing their substances? Dance Safe has testing strips that are accessible for us, and I think everybody needs to have these testing strips, as well as Narcan, which is a spray that's used for opioid overdose, because there's an epidemic of fentanyl being found in so many of these substances found non-clinically. And then, do they have access to outside contacts in case of emergency? Fireside chat, as well as psychedelicsurvivors.com are really great resources for that, but also a friend or therapist or somebody who, in case something goes sideways. Are our clients taking time to vet their shamans, to vet their facilitators, to ask them questions, to tune into their own body reactions around interviewing these facilitators to see whether this feels right or not? And then educating our clients around consent. There needs to be a negotiation process before consumption, because once we're in an altered state of awareness and consciousness, the threshold of what we can tolerate changes. Again, I said this earlier with MDMA and ketamine, the threshold of what we can tolerate emotionally and physically changes. So we might allow touch or sexual activity to occur with someone that we wouldn't in a sober state. So I've had individuals come in and have to work through the confusion and the pain of having had sex with somebody or sexual activity with somebody that they would not have. And they said yes to it. But again, in that altered state, it felt, they felt sexy and turned on. They're like, yeah, but that wasn't what they would have said. So this is really, really important to emphasize, set the boundaries, set the desires and expectations ahead of time, because that will change once you're in that state. And then also there's change in the physical threshold of what we can tolerate too. So on ketamine, there's, the body is more dissociated. So things like kink activity or impact play is not appropriate in that state, because that can do a lot of harm. Similarly, somebody can't feel where their body is at. Same thing happens with MDMA. We start rubbing ourselves and it feels really good. And then all of a sudden we realize we've rubbed ourselves raw. And we didn't realize that we were doing self-harm. Also, with the increase of emotional threshold, there's the pressure, and there's the possibility of pressure or the risk of fawning to pressure. So if there's a part of us that desires a specific outcome or agenda, there could be a possibility that pressure comes out in our body language or in our vocal tone or inflection. And so teaching our clients that that can happen, and even what fawning is, and fawning is the dorsal vagal reaction of the body, or of our system, in response to a perceived threat. Fawning is people pleasing. It is being appeasing and playful or light, downplaying something in order to create a sense of safety. So just knowing this ahead of time can help people to anchor in that could be a possibility on these substances. And then to also know that power roles exist when you're working with a facilitator. And so consent is more challenging in that sense, or it needs to be more clear, truthfully. But that individuals who are seeking help might have a difficult time with discerning boundaries. We see this in my research here, that people bypass their own boundaries because they thought they were afraid of the person who was in the power, or they thought that it would help them, or they thought that they were obliged to. So really just knowing how power roles play will be able to help to create more safety for us. And then, yeah. So in conclusion of all of this, like, psychedelics can really expand the scope and the capacity for our sexual healing and our intimate exploration, but when done with care and when done with the structure of attention to these unique challenges of consent changing and the power roles and dynamics. So training and expertise for facilitators is really imperative for the safety. I really believe in the power of this, but only as we have the reverence of this, just as this relates with the innate nature of the power and potency of sex in and of itself and of psychedelics in and of itself, and you bring them together. It's like a sharp knife. It can cut away the bullshit, but it can also cut us if we're not careful. So that's what I have for you today. I want to thank you all so much. And I guess, Pam, we can open for questions if there's
Absolutely.
any questions.
Thank you, Kat. That was really fascinating. Great data. Loved your analysis. Loved your thoughts and your commentary on it. One of the questions was around resources, and I just want to share with our audience that on the Psychedelic Association of Canada, on our website, if you go under ethics, we have 2 documents. Actually, we have 3 documents there. One is a code of ethics, generally for those that are working with psychedelics. 2 is how to find an ethical therapist and how to be an ethical therapist. And these are offerings to the community that have been made by therapists that from a working group, an ethics working group across Canada that has worked together to give some really solid guidelines for the above and the below ground. So, but what are there other resources that you have that you can suggest for people that are looking to work with somebody?
Oh, that's looking to work with. I mean, this is very new, so it's really hard to say. I've been speaking on the intersection of these 2 things. That's why I would really encourage talking to, really vetting them and seeing what their education is, both around, psychedelics and around sex therapy and trauma therapy. But some resources that I have also found really helpful and I give to clients the Psychedelic Survivors dot org. Did I say .org or .com? But they have resources to meet and be supported if you've been violated by a facilitator or a shaman or in the psychedelic space. I really love the work that they do. Also, Chacuna has a vast library of so many incredible resources and interviews, and talks about, narcissism in the psychedelic space, and sexual abuse in the ceremony space, and things to look out for. So I really love the work that they're doing too.
Right. And and all great resources. And there's a Chacuna Canada too. There's two Chacunas, Chacuna and Chacuna Canada as well. And when you were showing up your data there around people that had been transgressed or had had assaults, did you get a sense there? We cover this a lot in the ethics working group and stuff. Did you get a sense that it is wide? It's not really widespread, but it's too much, period.
Yeah.
But you get a sense that it's many individual assault, or it's like the repeat perpetrator, like it's the same person that's calling themselves a shaman in Peru and assaulting people, or it's the same therapist in a certain location in North America that has multiple, or like are those numbers like that? I think it was around 4.5. I think you had there.
Yeah.
Are those like? Did you get a sense of that?
That's a good question. And I think that's more, would be more research that would need to be done from this. This was just, from the scope of what these questions were, from individuals who've come to me. And I've been asked this question a lot. And people in my audiences have asked me these, or, shared their experiences as well. That sometimes some of these experiences have been people who the transgression happened in a ceremony, and they froze and then never went back to that person again for the work. But then I also have some, including friends, who had full-on relationships with the facilitators. And from my perspective, it's not, there's the power role there that I don't think that people understand. So it's not an equal relationship. It's someone seeking help, and there's someone who's providing help, and that just automatically puts us in these power roles. And in those situations, even the personal ones that I've heard from friends, is that it did a lot of damage. But because, ayahuasca or the psilocybin says, this is your person, this is your soulmate, this is it overrides our judgment.
Yeah. And it's a good point there that's being brought up, is that also there's this juxtaposition, because for me, I'm a physician, I wear a hat, I'm a regulated physician, my license can be taken away.
Yeah.
Right. And so, and in the underground, it can't. But for me and for regulated professionals, people that have licensing bodies, it is a no-go ever. And if you are, and there are still physicians that transgress, absolutely. But there's a process there. So if I found myself attracted to a patient, I have a process to go to where I can go to my licensing board and say, I have this issue, I am attracted to this person, what do I do? And they actually walk us through what has to happen. Like, okay, you can't have this person as a patient. You have to help them find another doctor. You can't see them for X number of time until like that power differential is erased.
Yeah.
And then after that amount of time of not seeing that person at all, only at that point might you go on a date or a coffee.
Yeah.
And that is like, and psychologists have that too. Like we all have these processes that don't yet really exist in the underground because you can't have the licensing really.
Yep. Yeah. That's why I think the emphasis on having these conversations to bring into people's conscious awareness, it's I don't want to put the responsibility on the consumer to have to guard themselves, but and so having these conversations with facilitators and shamans and therapists to bring that conscious awareness so that they don't have to guard themselves. And unfortunately, we got to educate the consumers to be able to take care of themselves. So
absolutely. And I'm wondering, we have a lot of therapists that watch. So you as a therapist, how do you were talking about this, how do you navigate that consent conversation around, like you said, you have a consent conversation about what is going to happen in the therapy. What is a yes? What is a no? How is it going to proceed? And they're not under the medicine. And then how do you proceed when the person is now under the medicine and changing their request? I'm curious. We have this conversation a lot, and I think this is a really great conversation for therapists.
Yeah. So what I teach is what makes your yes a yes. So it's getting them to pause and be in conscious awareness and question and what brought that yes. And so if it is something that, because I also have boundaries as a therapist, and I have limits of comfort and availability. And so it's important for me to also tune into, do I feel comfortable holding that person's hand, even though they requested it? And I said that could be a possibility, but now I don't, because I'm picking up in this sexual energy in them and that they're putting off, and I don't feel comfortable with holding their hand. I don't think that's a good idea. So it's instead of me initiating with a no, it's putting it back into a curious mindset. What makes your yes a yes? Tell me more about that. What are you noticing? What, that kind of thing. And then if they, still want it, then I get to tune in and say, and again, I'm always putting it back onto them. Well, what would it be like for you to hold your own hand or feel the warmth of your own comfort in your hand, and while I sit and hold space for you? So something like that. That's non-judgmental, compassionate, but also providing curiosity.
And I think the beautiful insights that you're giving here are really also speak to why therapists working with these medicines must be in consult groups.
Yes.
Must be an accountability group, so you can talk about this. What do you do? And what do you do? And how could I handle this? Or this was an awkward situation. So if you are a therapist out there, or you are working at all with these medicines, please make sure you are in a consult group of other colleagues where you can bounce these ideas off. You cannot work in psychedelics alone, and you should never see a therapist that is completely siloed.
Right.
We need to work in community, and we need to, this is emerging, like you said, right? And we're creating some things that have not been out there before, or have not been, fully elucidated. So a couple questions I would like to bring forward. Do you know if anyone is working on sex addiction, compulsion, and psychedelics? I'm guessing with psychedelics.
Ooh, that's such a good question. I'm not aware. I am not aware. And if you are, reach out to me. I would love to know you. But
I would
no,
think,
not specifically.
But as a therapist, wouldn't you think that all addiction is symptom soothing for the most part, right? So
yes.
So any therapist that is skilled at trauma, helping with trauma, should be able to work with somebody with sex addiction, just like you would be able to possibly. But
Yeah.
it is possible.
Right. And the reason why
skilled in the area. That's what I meant. But it could, because it's a trauma issue, right? The seed of the trauma then brings the addiction.
Yeah, and I would agree with that aspect. The unique aspect of, and I tend towards the labeling it as sexual compulsive activity rather than an addiction. But the challenge with it is that there can be a looseness of boundaries, and so the individual seeking help, how are they using their sexuality? Are they are they coming onto the therapist? Are they trying to use their body in overt or covert ways to manipulate the relationship or to feel in power? And so if a therapist isn't strong in their own understanding of their sexuality or their boundaries, then that becomes very enticing, and that can become very challenging to hold that hold that container.
Right. Oh, yeah. Lots of stuff there.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're doing it. It's complex. It's great. Hans asks, what is the dosing that you're using in sublingual ketamine to function as an empathogen?
It really depends. So if I'm working with couples, and they're doing the pathogen work, they're talking usually between 50 and 75. And then with an individual, I'll do about 150 if they're in their own experience, but they're still in their body, between 150 and 200. So they're still very much there, but more expanded.
Right. And then I know some therapists that will use the lozenges to get people there and then use generic ketamine intranasally just to get them both
on the same
around the same page, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And right at the very beginning, you were talking about, the lack of research around wellness and sexuality. And it really speaks to like the research you have done is so valuable, right? Because you're boots on the ground, you're working with clients, it's outcome based stuff. Like this is real people with real complexity and what's happening, versus like if you were doing it in a clinical trial, you have to try to reduce that complexity, right? You have to have more of a population that fits in a certain parameter, and then you have a protocolized intervention, which doesn't really suit very well with therapy or psychedelics.
Yeah.
And so how would you encourage, like, knowing the research you did, how can you encourage other people out there, like other therapists that maybe are working in a similar area or just generally with psychedelics, to also contribute to this body knowledge of information that will move the field forward, even if it's not in a clinical trial?
Oh my God, that's such a good question. I mean, I think there's so much power in collecting stories of people. And like I shared with my data, I found the themes in there, because the power of phenomenological research is seeing the themes in stories versus just the numbers. Numbers are great, but we don't necessarily, like I said, with you asked that question about the shamans and the facilitators, and I couldn't give you the story aspect of that. I could only show you the numbers there. So, collecting that, and with people's consent. Again, not all of our clients don't necessarily have consent to share that information, but in this regard, all of the study had everybody consent to it. Yeah, I would say that would be the best. They can also
and I
contribute
think
to this one.
the only thing that it stops you from doing is actually publishing it in a peer-reviewed journal, but it's still useful information. It's really information. And we've done a few things like that similarly with quantified citizen, like having this way where you can work with people to create really good studies. And I think that's another element of this, of being a therapist, is studying what's happening, right?
Yeah.
And getting a sense of what is happening in my practice, and am I getting the outcomes I think I am, and following up with people. Did it work, like a year down the road, right?
Yeah, I started this work 13 years ago, and what was taught to me in sex therapy then is very different to what I know now and understand now. So if you're not keeping up with it and the trends and the cultural climate, you're going to miss so much.
Right. Yeah. Well, you got to stay on top of lifelong learning, right?
Yeah.
I know we're coming up to the end here. There's a few more questions. So can I just toss them at you? How would you potentially customize using different medicines for individual partners depending upon their attachment style within the relationship?
Okay, say that one more time.
How would you customize using different medicines for individual partners depending on their attachment style within the relationship? That sounds like a lecture itself, just talking about attachment.
I know. Oh my God, that sounds brilliant. So I will give you a little bit of what I do. I work with IFS with the ketamine. So we're doing a lot of parts work in that. And in the parts work, being able to, ketamine is really powerful because, again, like I said, it increases the threshold of you can tolerate, you can recognize the emotions, you can recognize the stories, the perspectives of these parts. You can get into some of the memories, the painful memories of child youth, and without it dysregulating you. And so imagine in a couple dyad, one person is the person that I'm focusing on, the other person's witnessing it, and that creates a different perspective of the partner witnessing it, and so that can really contribute to attachment, being able to work with attachment. Now, types of medicines, the one that I'd want to be careful with, that I would give a caution to, is MDMA, because MDMA creates a sense of being in love. And that works in so many ways. Like I shared with the research on MDMA, how that can help us. But if a client is in an abusive relationship or a narcissistic relationship, or they have disorganized attachment, and they're trying to connect, they're trying to do this work with someone, that may not be a healthy person to fall in love with in the space of this. It overrides the very real red flags that are going on inside of us. Also, MDMA for individuals with disorganized attachment, like panic, anxiety, MDMA can increase that. So I've seen and heard stories of individuals like scratching themselves from so much anxiety because it heightened all of that. So I'm just really careful with that one in regards to, some of those symptoms. I mean, I don't think that somebody with disorganized attachment can't do MDMA. It's just, we just have these questions then. I've also helped people coming to me with questions about this, and helping them with education on their own exploration. I had the question of like vetting their partner to make sure that their partner that they're with is someone safe.
Amazing. You are just a fountain of information and insight. It's been an absolute delight. I want to honor your time today. Thank you so much for coming and joining us today. It's been just wonderful. We've copied the last questions. Maybe what we can do is get them to you, Dr. Kat, and we can add them in the show notes, maybe some brief answers to those last few questions. So again, thank you so much. It's been brilliant having you here. And thank you everyone that joined us. It's been fantastic. And if for anyone that wants to watch us again, it'll be posted in Mighty Networks in the next little while, and then it'll be posted publicly a little while after that. And I say a little while because, as Cheryl says, we need to get our volunteers do all the wonderful work in the background. So again, thank you so much. This will abruptly end. So I will say we'll hope to see you soon. We'll get you back again.